listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. You can talk to me about the things that seem too messy or weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or your spouse or even your therapist. If you would like my help sorting out your infidelity situation, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I want to mention that I use a somewhat narrow range of examples of infidelity situations as frames of reference on the podcast. And I often refer to the experiences of people who are married or partnered, but are also involved with someone else. And I want to make it clear that although I use a limited range of examples pretty regularly, my clients have a wide variety of different experiences. The specifics of the infidelity situations people come to me to talk about vary in a lot of ways. I work with queer folks and straight folks. I work with people who are married or partnered and people who aren't. I work with people who are the other person or people who are in a committed relationship and are seeing someone else or are seeing other people. I work with people who have very different definitions of what infidelity means. So I just want to apologize for the limited examples that I so often use. And I also want to tell you that no matter what your unique infidelity situation looks like, I'm here for you and I'm talking to you. Okay. Today, we're going to talk about dealing with guilt and shame. Now, as you may have heard me say before, perhaps many times, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, our feelings are created by our thinking. Our thoughts or beliefs or stories or perceptions generate emotions or feelings, which are sensations in our body to which we assign a one-word name, such as guilt and shame. If we know that our feelings are generated by our thoughts, then it shouldn't come as any surprise that people who are engaging in some form of infidelity often experience a fair amount of guilt and or shame because there are so many messages out there that tell us that cheating is bad. Infidelity is bad. And therefore, if you are cheating, you are bad. And many of us have bought into these ideas to one degree or another, right? And so if we believe that cheating is bad, and if we are cheating, we may believe that we are doing something bad. Or maybe we believe that we are bad, or maybe a bit of both. Now, side note, I am using the word bad as shorthand here. Maybe you would use more different or more nuanced language, and I often would too. But for the purposes of being concise, I'm saying that people think cheating is quote unquote bad to capture the whole range of non-positive attitudes many people have towards cheating and infidelity and towards people who cheat. Okay? Okay. That's the end of the side note. And guess what? When we believe that we are doing something bad or we believe that we are bad, we're going to feel feelings because any thought we think will generate a feeling. And the feelings that are often generated by believing we are bad or have done something bad are shame and guilt. It may sound like I'm just stating the obvious here, but the really important point is that our feelings of guilt and shame are the result of our thinking, not the natural or direct result of our actions. We often think that we feel guilt or shame or both because we have cheated or because we're doing something that we think counts as infidelity. But that's not quite how it works. It's what we think about our actions that create our feelings. If you didn't think that cheating was bad, you wouldn't feel guilt or shame if you cheated. And believe me, some people cheat and they do not feel guilt or shame. Some people have no compunctions about cheating. But a lot of people do, and that's what I'm focusing on today. A lot of people agree with the collective sentiment that cheating is bad, and then they think badly of themselves, at least to some extent, if they cheat or they're doing something that counts as infidelity. But what we have to remember is that even if we don't want to think of cheating as great or ideal or awesome, we don't have to think of cheating as bad. The actions that go into what we call cheating or infidelity are neutral until we give them meaning. There are many things that can be true about the actions that comprise infidelity or cheating or adultery or whatever we want to call it. And of course, we've got to recognize that the language we use to talk about these actions is really loaded with negative connotations, which can suggest that it is not possible to conceive of these actions in anything other than a negative light. But in fact, we can. Now, when I get into this with clients, they sometimes say, well, I don't want to think that cheating is okay. I'd rather not be cheating at all. So I don't want to think of what I'm doing as acceptable. And to that, I say, that's fair enough. The point isn't that you need to think that cheating is great or that cheating is something that you want to continue doing forever. The point is that if you want to feel less guilt and shame, which may be a useful goal, you're going to have to stop telling yourself that cheating is bad. But that doesn't mean you have to look at the flip side of the wrong coin and convince yourself that cheating is actually good. We have other options available to us beyond a dualistic and moralistic approach. Another thing people often say is, well, I can see how cheating might be a neutral circumstance. I can see how the actions I'm engaging in are neutral until somebody gives them meaning, but I chose to cheat. So I made a bad choice. And this, of course, is just another way of holding on to the idea that cheating is inherently bad and that if we're cheating, we're doing something wrong. It's understandable, though, that we may find so many different ways to tell ourselves that cheating is not okay and tell ourselves that it's not okay for us to think of cheating as anything other than bad, because there are so few messages out there that suggest that cheating could be anything other than terrible. Therefore, often when we think that if we dare to think of cheating as anything other than bad, we might be letting ourselves off the hook or abandoning all sense of principle, or that we might even be sociopaths who don't care about other people at all. Or put differently, we think we're doing something bad if we don't agree that infidelity is bad. And then we start to think that maybe we're even worse than we already thought we were. And guess what? That just leads us to feel more guilt and shame. Yay. Here's the problem with all of this. Feeling guilt and shame does not actually help us or anyone else. And I'll say that again for emphasis. Feeling guilt or shame or both does not actually help us or anyone else. Now, I know some people will tell you otherwise. Some people will tell you that guilt and shame are powerful motivators. Some people will tell you that guilt and shame will motivate us to do the right thing. Some people will tell you that when we feel guilt or shame, we will be motivated to see what we've done wrong and then choose to do the right thing because, of course, we'll want to do the right thing and we won't want to feel guilt or shame anymore. Now, I agree that guilt and shame are powerful motivators, just like all feelings are motivators of some kind of action. And particularly intense feelings tend to be particularly powerful motivators of action. But I do not agree that guilt and shame motivate us to do the so-called right things. Okay. So let's see what this looks like in practice. Think about a time when you have felt guilt or shame. What have you done? I can tell you that when I feel guilt or shame, I usually want to hide from myself and hide from the world, literally or figuratively or both. If I feel shame because I think there's something wrong with me, I certainly do not feel motivated to change what I think is wrong with me. I want to hide because I think there is something wrong with me. and I want to avoid facing whatever it is that I think is wrong. What could be worse than thinking that there's something wrong with us and potentially something wrong with us that we don't know how to change, right? And if I feel guilt about something I've done and I don't feel capable of doing anything differently, I feel terrible and I want to crawl into a hole and die. And I might be exaggerating, but only a little bit here. And my clients tell me that their experiences are similar. And in addition to that, there's all kinds of research out there that finds that lots of people have similar experiences to feeling guilt and shame too. So, as much as some people love to say that guilt and shame motivate positive actions, I don't agree. And in fact, there is all kinds of evidence out there that guilt and shame motivate us to take actions that don't ultimately help us or anyone else all that much. For example, if we feel really bad about cheating on someone, we may look for ways to avoid those bad feelings. And we may do that by cheating more because we get a rush out of doing so, or because seeing other people and getting attention from other people makes us feel good. Or maybe the sex itself, or the physical connection itself, or the emotional connection itself feels really good. Of course, we might do other things to get away from our feelings of guilt and shame. But the point is, we may take actions when we feel guilt or shame that compound the challenges rather than resolve the challenges we're contending with in our lives. Another thing that often happens when we feel guilt or shame is we may try to fix the feelings by taking actions that we think will make the feelings go away. And sometimes what this looks like is trying to make other people happy with us, or at least prevent other people from being unhappy with us. So, for instance, if we're supposed to be in a monogamous relationship with someone, but we're also involved with someone else or with other people, we might feel guilty or ashamed about cheating on our partner, lying to our partner, etc. Right? And we may try to fix what we think is the source of those feelings by being extra nice to our spouse or our partner, because we may think that if they're happy and happy with us and they don't seem to be aware of our extracurricular activities, then we'll feel okay. We won't have to feel guilt or shame. And this may sort of work in the short term. So it may seem like a really seductive and even logical solution. But even if it is a partial short-term solution, when we're focusing on trying to make sure someone else is happy so that we can feel okay, we are most likely avoiding the really big questions we're facing, such as, what do I ultimately want my love life to look like? Do I want to stay with my partner or my spouse? Do I want to run off with my affair partner? Do I want to be single? Do I want to be able to see whatever I want? If we maintain the status quo by keeping up appearances and attempting to make sure our spouse or partner doesn't know what we're up to, we may be able to temporarily avoid our guilt or shame, but we also preserve the conditions that we feel guilty about or ashamed of. We don't do the things we need to do to find the global resolution to our situation, right? There are so many other examples of the kinds of actions people take when they're feeling guilt and shame that I could share with you. But the overall point I'm making is that guilt and shame are indeed powerful motivators, but they are not motivators of sustainable positive changes. Self-acceptance, self-respect, and self-love are far better motivators of positive change than guilt and shame and self-reproach. So then the question is, how do we move from guilt and shame to self-acceptance, self-respect, self-love? There are 3 steps to this process. The first step is we have to be willing to feel guilt and shame when these emotions arise, instead of resisting these emotions or trying to avoid them or trying to make them go away. Now, I realize that might sound contradictory to everything I've just said about guilt and shame not being motivators of anything great. So let me explain. Guilt and shame are part of the spectrum of normally and naturally occurring human emotions. They're just there in a sense. They are feelings we can be pretty sure we're going to experience at times. They may not feel great, but they are part of the human experience. The human experience includes a lot of emotions, and some of those emotions feel amazing, and some of them do not feel amazing. And that's just the way it is. And it's actually fine. The only problem with so called negative emotions is that we tend to pathologize them. In our society, we tend to valorize the so called positive emotions and consider the so called negative emotions problematic. And when we think of certain emotions as problematic, we tend to interpret their presence as a sign that something is wrong. And then that creates a whole bunch of unnecessary suffering for ourselves. But fundamentally, there's nothing all that terrible about feeling guilt or shame or any other uncomfortable emotion. We don't layer a whole bunch of additional and unnecessary meaning onto it. An emotion is just energy in motion. It's just a vibration moving through our body, kind of like a weather system blowing through town. And even if the particular vibration associated with a specific emotion isn't fun, it isn't life threatening. So, in a sense, feeling a little shame or guilt isn't a big deal at all. Whoa, right? If we can be willing to ride out the sensations as they flow through our body, we can experience guilt and shame consciously without making it mean anything more than, gee, I'm feeling really uncomfortable in the moment, and without reacting to the sensations that we're experiencing. This is not what we typically do when we feel uncomfortable feelings, of course. And it does take practice to just feel our feelings and embrace the discomfort instead of rejecting it or resisting it or trying to fix the feelings. And if this is something that you would like to learn how to do more effectively, let's work together. This is something that I help my clients do, and it's a skill that can change your life. Now, the second thing we need to be able to do if we want to shift our relationship with guilt and shame is to identify the thoughts that are generating our feelings. Even if the feeling of guilt or shame is a natural, inevitable part of the human experience, we may not want to continuously think thoughts that create feelings of guilt or shame because, as I described earlier, the actions we're likely to take when we're feeling guilt and shame are unlikely to help us create the lives we truly want to live. Different feeling states give us the capacity to take different kinds of actions or refrain from taking different kinds of actions. And we may not love the actions we take and the results of the actions we take when we're acting from the place of guilt and or shame. So, if we want to emerge from shame or guilt, we have to be willing to become aware of what we are thinking. We have to identify the thoughts that are generating the feelings of shame and guilt. Here are some examples of thoughts that can generate shame or guilt. Some of my clients tell me things like, I know cheating is the worst possible thing you can do to someone, or I know what I'm doing is wrong, or if my spouse were to find out what I'm doing, they'd never forgive me. Or if anyone I care about found out about what I'm doing, they wouldn't respect me anymore and they might not even love me anymore. And these are all pretty dire pronouncements, right? When we're thinking these kinds of thoughts, we're probably believing them. And we're probably also feeling terrible as a result of believing them. And perhaps most importantly, these thoughts may not seem like thoughts. They may seem like matter of fact reflections of the truth, but they aren't. The kinds of ideas I just mentioned are not facts. They are not non-negotiable reflections of reality. They are not observations that any neutral observer would agree are true. Therefore, they are thoughts or stories or beliefs or predictions. Things that have not happened yet are never facts. They're speculations or predictions. And we have to be willing to recognize that these ideas floating through our head are thoughts. We have to be willing to recognize that all thoughts are optional. We don't have to believe that cheating is the worst possible thing you can do to someone. Yeah, other people might think that. That may be true. Someone important to you may have told you that, and you may have believed them. And if you have, that's okay. If that's where you are, that's where you begin. But the point is, we have to be able to identify what we're thinking if we want to ultimately shift our feelings. Then, the third thing you have to be able to do to move out of guilt and shame is decide on purpose what you are going to think about yourself and your behavior. And this, of course, requires a willingness to change your thoughts, which can be kind of a big deal. More specifically, allowing yourself to believe that cheating might be anything other than bad might seem strange to you. Or maybe it doesn't seem so strange, but you can't quite get your head around what you might specifically think about cheating if you didn't think of it as bad. So let me give you some examples. There's a big difference between thinking I'm doing something bad or I'm doing something wrong and thinking I don't feel great about what I'm doing right now, or I'm doing something right now that I feel conflicted about. You don't have to go from thinking what I'm doing is bad to thinking what I'm doing is great. You can observe that you don't feel amazing about cheating without condemning yourself for cheating. I also encourage you to recognize the things that you like about your situation, in addition to the things that you might not like about your situation. So, again, let's say you're married and you're doing things with other people or another person that your spouse doesn't know about. And you feel bad about lying to your spouse and having sex with someone else or with other people when your spouse thinks you are being sexually faithful to them. Maybe you don't like any of that one bit. And if that's the case, that's fair enough. You don't have to convince yourself to like those things. But you do need to recognize what you do like about your infidelity situation. You're probably learning a lot about yourself as a result of doing whatever you're doing. You probably feel amazing in ways you never have before or may not have felt for a long time. You may be having great sex for the first time in a long time or the first time ever. You may really enjoy the emotional connection with the other person you're involved with, or maybe with other people, plural, you're involved with. No matter what the specific details of your situation are, the point is there are probably some things you really like about it, in addition to the stuff that you don't like about it, because otherwise, why would you bother dealing with all of the stuff you don't feel great about at all? Now, a lot of times, people struggle to acknowledge these good things because they've bought into the idea that since infidelity is bad, it's not okay for them to enjoy the things that they do enjoy about their situation. And of course, this is very closely related to the idea that we can shame ourselves or scold ourselves out of behavior we think is bad or problematic. But it's far more effective to identify the behavior we prefer and get clear on why you want to engage in those behaviors instead of whatever you're currently doing. So, for example, you may love the great sex you're having in your infidelity situation, but you may also really dislike the dishonesty and the deception that goes along with it. What if you could tell yourself that? What if you could tell yourself, I love some aspects of my situation, and I also don't love other aspects of it? That's probably a lot more true for you than what I'm doing is bad. If you love some aspects of your situation, then it isn't all bad. And therefore, by trying to tell yourself that it is, you're lying to yourself in addition to telling yourself you're doing something wrong. And this creates both shame and confusion, right? And this simply isn't helpful. To state something I've already said in a slightly different way, we may think that moral absolutes are helpful in trying to change behavior, but more often than not, they aren't. More often than not, trying to hold ourselves to rigid standards of right or wrong only create feelings within us that do not lead us to actions that are all that beneficial for anybody in the end. When you can accept what you like about your infidelity situation, in addition to acknowledging what you don't like about it, you're likely to feel better. You're likely to find relief from guilt and shame and from confusion and dread and paralysis, and maybe a whole bunch of other feelings. And when we feel better, when we feel less bad, we can then make decisions and take action in ways that we really can't when we are consumed by intensely uncomfortable emotions. When emotion is high, intelligence is low. If we're feeling intense shame and guilt, we're going to make different decisions than we will if we're feeling self-respect or self-acceptance or equanimity. So if you want to make changes to your infidelity situation that you're going to feel good about in the long term, you need to be able to get out of your shame spiral. And in order to do that, you need to be willing to think thoughts about your infidelity situation that don't generate shame and guilt, or at least you need to be able to think thoughts that generate feelings other than shame and guilt. The guilt and shame may never go away completely, and that's okay. But when those are the dominant feelings you're operating from, or the only feelings you're operating from, nothing great is likely to come of that. Okay. So I want to make it really clear here. I'm not saying that, we just get away from our guilt and shame and then everything's perfect and everything's fine and there's no more work to do. That's not the case at all. If you want to make changes, you're going to have to take action for sure. And that includes being accountable to yourself and responsible for your actions. But we can approach accountability and responsibility from a place of self-acceptance and respect for the fullness of our humanity, rather than a black and white moralistic perspective of I'm either bad or good, I'm doing something right or I'm not doing, or excuse me, I'm doing something wrong or I'm not doing something wrong, etc. Now, changing your thoughts about your infidelity situation may take work. I'm talking about it right now as if it's a simple and straightforward process. And in a sense, it absolutely is. But changing our beliefs about anything may take some dedicated effort. Changing our stories about who we are and about the meanings of our actions takes willingness and dedication and practice. Embracing the complexities and contradictions in our lives may require us to change beliefs we've held for a long time. Learning how to love ourselves and accept ourselves, not in spite of our so-called imperfections, but because of them, can be a project, right? But what project could possibly be more worthwhile in this lifetime? Okay, so just to recap, the 3 steps for dealing with guilt and shame are to allow ourselves to feel them when they arise, know that they're normal parts of the human experience, and then identify the thoughts that are generating our feelings of guilt and shame, and then intentionally change our thinking so that we don't get stuck feeling inordinate amounts of guilt and shame indefinitely. You can experiment with doing this on your own, right? And if you'd like my help working with guilt and shame in a really deliberate and focused way and changing your relationship with guilt and shame so that you're not stuck in guilt and shame spirals, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right, everyone, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate and review the show on iTunes. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.